I welcome you today to day one of the Breaking the Silence Summit, Healing Childhood Sexual Trauma. I am your host, Janine Naus. It's a pleasure having you join us on this summit, and I'm here with a great guest who I love chatting with. Her name is Rachel Grant, and she's in San Francisco, California. Rachel is the owner and founder of Rachel Grant Coaching and is a sexual abuse recovery coach. She is also the author of Beyond Surviving, the final stage in recovery from sexual abuse. She works with survivors of childhood sexual abuse who are beyond sick and tired of being feeling broken, unfixable, and burdened by the past. She helps them let go of the pain of abuse and finally feel normal. Her program, Beyond Surviving, has been specifically designed to change the way we think about and heal from abuse. Based on her educational training, study of neuroscience, and lessons learned from her own journey, she has successfully used the program since 2007 and help her clients break free from the past and move on with their lives. Rachel holds a Master's of Arts degree in counseling psychology. She provides a compassionate and challenging approach for her clients while using coaching as opposed to therapeutic models. She sounds pretty amazing, doesn't she? Well, today Rachel offers a great topic, and it's called Choosing to be Intimate Again. I imagine our audience is curious about this topic, and I'm sure Rachel will be happy to answer that question. Rachel, welcome to Breaking the Silence Summit. It's great to have you with us today and to share on your topic,
Yeah,
Choosing to be Intimate Again.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. It's really great to have you here, and I certainly love what you're doing, and I love that you're helping people, to be able to choose to be intimate again, and I'm sure, there's much more that you do too, and this is the topic you're focusing on. But
Yeah.
before we step into our topic, I'm curious about something. So Rachel, how is intimacy tied to trust and vulnerability?
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that question. It's really nice to have this opportunity to connect with you and your community here today and to explore this topic of intimacy that I think is one that we sometimes make harder than it has to be. And certainly in my own journey in healing from sexual abuse, intimacy was one of those things that it really felt like an uphill battle to get there. And I found myself constantly running away and pushing myself away from intimacy. So when things started to shift in my life and I began to get a little bit more serious about healing and facing up to the fact that I had gone through this, trauma and figuring out what to do about that, certainly one of the biggest topics that I took on was relationships and how to be empowered in relationship. And one of the things that I discovered along that journey is this kind of what I think of as this triangle of connection between trust, vulnerability, and intimacy. We sometimes think of those as things that stand on their own. I might trust it over here and then be vulnerable over here, and then there's intimacy in this camp. But there's this beautiful relationship between them all. And when we begin to understand that trust plus vulnerability leads to intimacy. So it's an outcome. Intimacy is not a stand on its own kind of thing. It's really not present unless you have trust and vulnerability there as well. And so as we're trusting someone, as we're creating moments of vulnerability, intimacy is like this beautiful product that gets created as a result.
Mm. That is such a beautiful description, and the triangle aspect of it. I really love how you approach that. So Rachel, what is your definition of intimacy?
So yes, when we are talking about this, I was like, well, what the hell is it anyway? Right? So people have lots of different ideas about what intimacy is. And I think for survivors of sexual abuse, there's often a collapsing of intimacy and sex. These two things become, like it's the same thing. And so the very first thing that we want to do is to separate that and see intimacy as separate from sexuality, separate from relationships that involve sex, even romantic relationships. Instead, we can have intimacy with all kinds of people on all different levels. And so many years ago, I came across this definition of intimacy. It's not mine. I can't remember where I found it or who said it, but it has really been the guiding light in my life around this particular topic. So my favorite definition of intimacy is that it is the knowledge and understanding that we have of someone through the detailed study and experience of another person. So the reason why I love that definition is because it hits on some really important layers. First of all, I was captured by the fact that it was defined as knowledge and understanding, right? This place of knowing rather than a place of feeling, which I'd never come across before. And that really started to shift my understanding of what it would be like to experience intimacy. And then I thought, okay, the second half here is all about the study and the experience of another person. And this helped to begin broaden what intimacy could count as, right? If I'm just sitting on the couch with someone and having a conversation, studying them, if you will, that's a moment of intimacy. Sitting and watching a movie with someone, sharing an experience like that is also intimacy. And because of that, we can start to see that there's a broad spectrum of intimate experiences. So everything from getting to know that the guy at the grocery store has 2 kids, right? To going on a really intense emotional retreat with your best friend, to sitting down and having some conversations with people in your life, to going and running, a marathon, with your partner. So when we start to take it out of this, space where it's always like this intense emotional thing. And we instead start to notice, well, I'm creating intimacy in my life every time I'm getting to know someone or letting someone get to know me. Every time I'm sharing an experience with someone. And I think that takes a lot of that fear and anxiety about intimacy out.
That's great. And these two halves that you were talking about, and then it all culminating to trying to take that fear out of that whole aspect about being intimate with somebody, and recognizing that it's in all these different interactions and relationships how we connect with another being, really.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's
And,
beautiful.
I think one of the reasons why that was so critical for me and what I've seen with my clients that I've been working with for the past 11 years is that, when we go through a trauma, we often end up feeling very isolated and disconnected, very different from others. And so this feeling of how can I build relationships? How can I build connection? And when we have it as this very big, intense thing, right, boy, that just, we want to run away from that. But when we start to put it into this frame, it starts to become much more accessible. And so the other reasons why I love this definition and perspective about intimacy is it gives us more access to connection. It removes a lot of those barriers. And so we can start to really step out of that isolation and disconnection that we can find ourselves in as a result of sexual abuse trauma.
Beautiful. So Rachel, I appreciate that whole explanation, the definition. That's just great. So I have another question. What does research tell us about fear and trauma?
Oh, interesting. So one of the things that starts to happen when we're going through trauma is that our fear response system, so that's the limbic part of our brain that has the amygdala and the thalamus and all these different elements, it becomes activated, which is exactly what we want the brain to do. It helps us to survive in really important ways. But what happens over time is that the brain really becomes, it's like it becomes trained towards fear.
Mm.
And so a lot of those of us who've gone through sexual abuse or some sort of trauma, we're out in the world, but it's like we're in this on guard, activated state all the time. We're like, okay, wait, is something over there going to get me? Is something over there going to get me? Wait, what's going to happen over here? And
Mhm.
so your system just kind of gets programmed for fear and disproportionately. That's really the key here. So it's all right to have fears, of course. It's normal to have your system kind of responding to, something that is startling or scary. But when we're overactivated like this, then it's really hard to find a place of kind of calm and peace, which of course makes being in relationship or connecting with others, scary or hard.
Mm. Yeah, when I felt fear, I felt like I closed off from any kind of connection, and
Yeah.
that really would surprise me because when you get in that state of mind where you're fearful, it's hard to move forward.
It is.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons as I was developing the Beyond Surviving program, I was thinking about, what we need to do when. So, today we're talking about intimacy, but just for context for people,
Mhm.
in my 16 session program, intimacy is session 13.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So it's right near the end of that work because there's a lot of other stuff that we want to take on that really opens the door even more to being able to trust, experience vulnerability, and build intimacy. So part of that is the system regulation piece, getting that fear response center back in control, having a little bit more say about that. So you're not as easily triggered, you're less fearful. And again, yeah, that opens the door a bit more and makes accessing some of these things easier. But even with that said, understanding some of the frameworks that we're talking about today and some of the steps that you can begin to do right now is great, as is also going to be a great jumping in place.
Yeah, fabulous. So, Rachel, what are some reasons survivors of abuse avoid intimacy?
Oh man, okay, so we need like a whole hour for this. So I'm going to try to like drill it down to some of the primary reasons that I see over and over and over again, and of course
Mhm.
speaking also from my own experience.
Mhm.
A lot of times we have some wrong ideas about what intimacy means or entails. Big one is that intimacy means I have to share everything with everyone I meet. So if I'm going to have intimacy with a person, I have to just pull back, the curtain and here it all is and lay it all out. And not just with that one person, but with any person we come across.
Mhm.
And that right there is just going to throw your system into like, oh, hell no, right? Like, I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
And so, this place of which we can think of having intimate relationships in which we share some of ourself with some people, more of ourself with others, and we always get to choose about how much we want to share and how open and available we want to be. It's not a rule that in order to have intimacy, you have to share everything. That's one of the big ones. I think the other one is there's this sense of like, I'm going to be taken advantage of. It's like there's this, once we get into a level of intimacy and connection, other fears start to show up. The fear of abandonment, the fear of being taken advantage of, the fear of being used. And so it sets off all these other ideas. There's like this association that people have between intimacy and these other outcomes, which we also want to challenge and be able to push back against, which is something that I work with my clients on in the program, because looking at the associations or beliefs that we have about intimacy is going to greatly impact how willing we are to let that intimacy grow. If we have, if you're thinking, well, if I'm going to let intimacy in or be intimate with someone, I'm going to be taken advantage of, or they're going to expect something from me now. I'm now obligated to something. The chances we're going to let that intimacy grow are not very high.
Mm. Wow. So, I'm trying to think here in terms of, these reasons that survivors of abuse, avoid the intimacy. So that kind of gives sort of a reflection of what happens. And
Mhm.
so one of the things I'm curious of is, what are some breaking behaviors that people use to block the creation of intimacy in their lives?
Yeah. So this kind of lingo, breaking behaviors, is something that's been born out of the work that I do in Beyond Surviving. And so just to give people a little bit of context, when we have trust and vulnerability with someone in our lives and we're starting to see that intimacy is growing, if we have fears or false beliefs about intimacy, then we will do something to disrupt the creation. It's like, okay, the intimacy is growing, the relationship's deepening, it's building, and then you go, oh no, gotta get out of here,
Mhm.
right? And so it's literally like applying the brakes and saying, nope, stop, gotta bring this back to a supposedly safer level, like a level in which your system feels like it can, remain. And so, common breaking behaviors, ways that we interrupt the creation of intimacy, picking fights,
Mhm.
right? Just stirring up some shit, right? Like making
Mhm.
things difficult. Also, things like just being withdrawn. Oh, all of a sudden you're very, very busy. You don't have time to connect. You don't have time to spend, with that person and share those experiences and let the intimacy grow. No, no, I've got a lot of work to do, or, oh, I just have so much going on. Shopping, busyness, right? All of those kind of things. We can draw, put our energy into that. Fantasizing can also be a way that we block the creation of intimacy. We put our mind and our heart off into a fantasy land, whether that be television or books or just in our own minds. And so this distracts us from being present with the person.
Mhm.
There's a great book called Getting the Love You Want. I'm forgetting the author's name in this moment, but one of the things he talks about is how in relationships people will have what he calls exit strategies, and it's the same idea. He just calls it a little bit differently, but what are we doing that actually causes us to separate or pull apart from people? For me, one of my major breaking behaviors can be sarcasm. And
Mhm.
oh, whatever, I don't care, it doesn't matter, right? It's a way of kind of pushing away and saying that this doesn't impact me, or I'm going to distance myself from you by using sarcasm. There's a
Mhm.
long, long list, but basically the idea is to check in for those of you who are listening, is to begin identifying those breaking behaviors. Just notice, like when you start to reach a threshold where it feels challenging to remain intimate, what do you turn to, right? Is it all of a sudden your phone? Are you on Facebook? Are you, oh, I've got to go out for a walk, even like exercise, these sorts of things. Not that any of that is bad or wrong, and you shouldn't get to have those things in your life. It's really just about where you're placing it and how you're using it.
Hmm. Wow, that's very interesting. So then, when somebody is in this experience of noticing that they're breaking, and what are some things that they could kind of say to themselves or do when they're in that situation that
Yeah.
to stay present with what is going on at that moment?
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that one of the most important things is the awareness piece, to just be able to see yourself doing it. So if you can, even in that moment, just say, oh yeah, here I go, I'm doing that breaking thing, I'm wanting to step away, I'm wanting to pull back. Just being able to pause and name that and recognize that that's what you're about to do is often enough to support you in not disengaging. One of the things that I teach my clients is the 3-minute stretch. So when we reach those thresholds, right, that I was talking about, and you know them, like when your system is kind of going like, enough, get out of here, I need to break away, right, is to just literally set a timer for 3 minutes. And whatever it is, whether it's a conversation or sitting next to your partner on the couch or talking with whatever it is, just hold for another 3 minutes. This teaches your system, it gets you past the fear response and the withdrawal response, and it helps stretch your capacity. So you're deepening your ability to remain in those moments. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, yes.
Awesome. I'm just gonna put the window down a little bit. The sun decided to like come flying out. I'm like, okay, that's beautiful, but also maybe people would not like to see. There, that's better.
Sunny California.
Fantastic. Yeah, sunny California, no complaints. But yeah. Does that answer your question? Does that make
Oh,
sense?
absolutely. I thought it was perfect. It was great. Great,
Cool.
great, great response. I really appreciate that. So, Rachel, can you take us through an exercise to help us more deeply connect with our relationship to intimacy.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
So, how are we doing on time?
We got time.
We
We
got
do.
time. Okay, so what I would like to do is invite those of you who are listening, if you feel safe and comfortable, closing your eyes. I'm just going to take you through a little vision exercise. It is not required that you close your eyes for this exercise, so only do that if you feel okay. What I'd like you to imagine is that you are sitting on a bench. But this is a very strange bench because it's only got enough room for just you. So we call this the bench for one. And you're sitting here on this bench with no room to either side of you. For many of us, we sit on the bench for one and we think, oh, I really want to have a relationship. Why don't I have any friends? Nobody's ever, here for me. I'm all alone. I'm all by myself. Part of what's happening and why that's the case is because we're on a bench for one and we literally have no one and no room for anyone to sit down next to us. And we found ourselves here on this bench of one because of those fears that we have about being in relationship, trusting, vulnerability, intimacy. So just take a moment here and notice what it's like to sit in that kind of space, to sit here on this bench and notice the thoughts that have helped you to arrive here. What are those fears or concerns that you have about intimacy? Now, to gain access to intimacy, we have to create some room on the bench. We have to stretch this space out. And one of the ways that we do that is by challenging the beliefs that we have about intimacy. So for now, let's just imagine you've done that work. We're just going to fast forward that step a little bit and just embrace for a moment the possibility that all those fears and concerns that you have about intimacy are gone and you've been able to expand that bench. And now there's some room where people can sit down next to you. Now, the next thing that happens is someone does come and they sit down on our bench next to us. And just imagine that for a moment, what that feels like to have someone potentially coming into your life and sitting on your bench. But man, they turn out not to be a very good friend, or they're kind of a jerk, or you just don't really connect. And it's like, man, I don't really want you on my bench. And so we say, get off my bench and send them away. Now, what we often do in that moment is we make that bench small again, right back to our bench for one. See, I shouldn't have let anyone in. Why did I trust? Man, that was stupid. That was a mistake. I'm just going to go back. It's just me, back to me again. And then as we're sitting here on this bench for one, I want you to begin to just visualize and notice hundreds of people walking back and forth in front of you. And among those hundreds of people, there are some of them who would be really great for you to connect with. A great friend, a colleague, a lover, a partner, and yet there's no room for them to sit down. And so you're missing out on those connections. Just take a moment to tune into how that feels, to know that you're missing out on those connections. From that space, we begin to extend the bench again. Go ahead and begin to imagine that. We want to have that room. And our job when it comes to intimacy is all about keeping the bench open. And so we invite people into our lives and they sit down next to us and they turn out to be great. It's awesome. We bring them more into our lives. But if they turn out not to be great, we thank them for their time and we send them on our way. But we keep that space open and available for the next person to arrive. Just notice how that feels and what would start to shift or change in your life if you were able to stay in that space of availability to relationship. Doesn't mean everyone gets to be in, doesn't mean everyone remains, but that you have this openness and this possibility for people to be able to connect with you. You start to create this community. Imagine this community that you get surrounded by of people who you get to know and get to know you, people who you get to share experiences with. And through that, you have an abundant community and lots of rich connections in which you can experience intimacy in all kinds of ways and on all kinds of levels. Just tap into how that feels for a moment. Connect with that. And all that becomes possible and available when you do that. And whatever you're feeling right now, it could be a mix of things. You might feel that old part of you saying, no, 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 this still feels really scary. But you also might be noticing that part of you that says, yeah, that feels good. I like that. I want that. And so you can come back and access this feeling anytime, particularly when you find yourself wanting to break, wanting to run away from intimacy. You can connect back into this feeling and the benefits of having that openness and that availability. So if your eyes are closed, go ahead and open them. Come back to us.
Wow,
Yeah.
Rachel, that was beautiful. Wow, I feel like great.
Yay.
That was great too. I was like that was fabulous.
Thank you.
So, Rachel, I wanted to ask for people who that are listening today, what do you think they need to do to experience all that we're talking about? I mean, you shared some really wonderful things here.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find to be the most important for survivors of sexual abuse trauma is understanding where you are in this journey. So one of the things that I've created is a 3 stages of recovery checklist. So I talk about it in a very linear way just because it's easy for our brains to kind of understand. And in many ways, we do kind of move through these stages from victim to survivor to what I call beyond surviving. At the same time, we might be in one stage in one area of our life and further along in another. But in general, by understanding where you are in that path, whether it be overall or in a specific area, you can then hone in on what the specific goals are for that stage of healing, what kind of support is the best kind of support to get for that stage of healing. I think a lot of survivors end up being re-traumatized because they don't know exactly where they are, and they step into getting support around this, but the person that they're working with doesn't understand where they are, and doesn't understand how to titrate the goals and have that alignment. So I've just found that this little framework helps people get a little bit of a better sense of where they're at and what they need to do and how to get there.
Hmm. So is this a guide of some sort that you put together?
Yeah, that's right. So you can download, it's a 9-page guide. And so what you'll do is you'll read, I talk about what each stage is. And then there's going to be a checklist for you to fill out in each stage. So you can kind of see what you've achieved, what you haven't achieved. And then there's a list of resources and support that, you can look into to help you based on where you kind of mostly land on that spectrum.
That sounds like a really very helpful checklist for people to get, and really appreciate that and that free gift that you're offering. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Rachel, and I guess from what from conversation I had with you before was this. It's called the 3 stages of recovery from
Yeah, that's right.
checklist.
Yep.
Okay, great. You can get access to this on our replay page, or you can go to where you will find Rachel's link, website link on our replay page. So is there anything else you want to share with our audience today?
So the other thing that I'll mention, since it came up in our conversation today, is that if you're finding that this topic of intimacy, you're kind of like, ooh, this is curious, and yeah, I'm interested, but also a lot of, oh, I feel really charged around this, and it doesn't feel quite accessible. That may mean that you need some of that system regulation work to support you in that first. And so for many people, starting out with that is the place to begin. And to support you in that, I have a 28-day boot camp for the brain self-study program. So this is something that you have lifetime access to, and you can work through the materials in 28 days, or you can take a little bit longer if you want. This program is really all about supporting you in kicking PTSD to the curb, understanding how to take charge of your brain and your nervous system, how to heal that, get back into that proportional response that we were talking about earlier, build confidence, regain energy. And so throughout the 28 days, you'll go through various circuits that include reading and reflection lessons, video trainings, and of course, integration days, where you really get to practice and, make the tools your own. And you'll have support from me via email, and then also via a weekly Facebook chat and a Facebook group. So if you're noticing, okay, I love this intimacy stuff, but I'm not feeling like I'm ready for it, I have a lot other work to do around, managing triggers and building confidence, then start with the 28-day program. And this is a sliding scale program, so you pay what you can. And you can access that at rachelgrantcoaching.com/bootcamp.
That sounds like a wonderful program, Rachel. I really, I think that's great that you're offering that.
Thanks.
And then you shared, as far as where to connect and to her website, which is rachelgrantcoaching.com. And also you can, find her website on our replay page if you happen to not recall, and it's very easy to get to that. So we're here with our very special guest, Rachel Grant, and she's certainly a compassionate and funny individual and shines a light on choosing to be intimate again. And she has many gifts, and she would love to work with you. And again, you can connect with her at her link on our replay page, or go to www.rachelgrantcoaching.com. Rachel, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And it's been such a pleasure to connect with you. And I really hope you have a great day.
Thank you. It's been so nice, and I just really appreciate you creating this space. Look forward to hearing the other speakers. And yes, if you have any questions or have any curiosities around anything we've talked about today or any of the other work I do, definitely feel free to reach out. I'm happy to be a resource and support however I can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel.
You're welcome.
All right,
take care, everyone.
Thank you.